Now we're back.
We can hear you well.
So real quick intro. I was born in upstate New York. My father was a professor of photography at RIT. And so we kind of grew up in the country in the farmland, saw a lot of these traditional Dutch barns. And that was like 0 to 10, then 10 to 15 was Chicago, and 15 to 18 was Mississippi. So I saw a lot of America in that time frame, a lot of different building vernacular styles, wealth, lack of wealth, etc. And just sort of felt by moving so much where it was, we were always fixing up a new house, or an old house that was new to us, and it seemed like when it was all good, it was time to go on and do it again. And I enjoyed the process, so that was kind of my start into carpentry. And it began with a kind of general interest in all subjects as a teenager. Wasn't sure where to go for college, had a lot of interests, definitely thought about an undergrad in architecture, and went to St. John's College, which is a small liberal arts school based on the great books, The Western World. And as I told Tanya and some others, the joke there is it's where old Jewish men teach young Protestants to become good Catholics. And so it's a secular institution, but very small, 400 people, and you're reading old dead white men, from the Greeks through the moderns and Einstein. And it was everything I wanted and more and needed, and kind of lit a candle just under this idea of history of what humans do and my love of building. And so I was some convoluted way in my junior year decided I had this epiphany when I knew I was gonna have to go out into the real world. I want to build cathedrals. That was, it seemed like a perfectly logical concept and something that I could devote my life to. And I think at that point too, maybe a little bit of adolescent optimism and youthful naivete, but I associated good work with a good life. Like if I could, we'd all kind of look uphill, and maybe you guys do the same thing with this architects. You think, gosh, that looks like a good life. If I could do what he's doing and she's doing, then I'd be happy. And I think it's important that we have that drive or we have that interest, but I will give you a little point of caution, at the age of 43, looking back on it, there's no perfect job. Even all the pictures on Instagram of the guy in the jet boat in front of the big house they just built, like it all comes with its own stuff. And so be careful of that, but don't let that dissuade you from still going after this with a kind of love and a passion and a belief that it will bring you something. But the happiness part is wrapped up in a whole lot of other stuff. So there I was trying to figure out how to do this. And I worked with many general contractors. I stick frame houses. I built on Mount Desert Island, $1 million stuff. And it just wasn't very impressive. After a couple of years, it was cool. I gained skills. I admired the people I worked with, but it was all just kind of a cardboard construction with veneer. And in the woodworking world, if you want to kind of pursue a higher level of craft, which is exactly how I express it, that's what I was feeling. It was just like something a little higher. It's either wooden boat building, timber framing, or furniture making. Those are your three logical kind of choices. Who knows? Now some people make a living spoon carving. But so anyway, so I pursued this idea of went to Europe, spent 4 months backpacking around, and we'll come back to this slide in a second. This is an important one and very, very cool. But these are the kind of buildings that I walked through when I was in Europe. This is an amazing building. This is one of the tithe barns, so at the height of Western Catholic monasticism and lordship, you'd give 1/10 of your acreage, the wheat, the barley, the grain, whatever it produced. We're going to these massive barns. And so this is called the Crescent Temple. This is built by the Knights Templar in the 1200s. And it has what they call this X and Y bracing. This is all done without a kind of numeric or algebraic math. This is all done with proportion and geometry and ratio, and we'll get into that a little bit too. But these are the buildings you walk in and are just kind of in awe of. And this would have been quite, sort of contemporary with Notre Dame, the stuff we're talking about, the hewing, a lot of the joinery. You notice a lot of half laps, when you're cutting, cutting a full mortise, boring in takes a little more work with hand tools. So axe culture and work sometimes influences the joinery decisions. This is a form that I just love. This is Lee Court. This is the widest cruck frame barn. And so by a cruck, what it means is these blades that come off the sort of stem wall, they can be interrupted. I'm not sure. I'll show you another example where there's sort of like two-tier crucks, but sometimes in their glorious examples, they go all the way from the walls up to the peak. And so this is a classic example of just, you can't buy wood like that. Like you have to go find it and make it. And oh, thank you, little pointer. So yeah, the cruck blades here. And in a perfect world, they would be book matched. If you had one nice kind of banana log, you could open it in half. But usually what that's going to mean is they're going to distort. The trees have to be enormous to do that. So usually they're done out of single trees, and you look for a sympathetic curve. This would be an example of a masonry one. So those cruck blades it's a really awesome stout roof, that is acting like a buttress into these pockets. So it's kind of cool. It's a timber frame without posts. This is all just a roof system. So these are the things I saw and fell in love with. And what I tell people sometimes too, it's kind of like we talk about the Indian using the whole deer or not being wasteful, that, a lot of these are from curved branches. Most of the cruck blades are main stems. There's a bit debate as to whether this is always the base or is this the base sometimes, and then this was a fork and they cut it. But usually this is always the roots of the tree rising up. But all these little wind braces up here, all those secondary members, very economical. And what it means, this is a classic example of a layered roof system where you have a principal rafter supporting, in this case, I guess we'd call them common purlins, or they are principal purlins, but there's lots of them. And then these little common rafters are like 3x5s, and they're usually on the flat. We always think of a rafter as a 2x10, something stiff up on edge. When you have a lot of supporting members like this, all the main roof force is transferred. So this whole thing is just a series of graduated forces, down to the ground. It's unbelievable. And these are little saplings, and it was easier to make them 3x5 on the flat if you think about it, because if you have a squiggly tree, you can just still kind of find that neutral axis and cue it. So sometimes you go into buildings and they have these really neat kind of character common rafters where they squiggle from left to right as they go up. This is a reproduction. This one I think they call Pilton. It was actually burned. I think it was arson or something in the 90s. And so a lucky timber framer, Peter McCurdy in England, got the opportunity to rebuild it. So again, all this stuff carries on. So I show this is the stuff that feeds me. Now it looks pretty rugged and crusty. This is what's interesting too, is that these are early kind of basilica churches, king post trusses. And I guess since we're in it right now, that's why I'll go back to this one's super cool. So this is a king post truss in St. Catherine's Monastery in Alexandria, Egypt, North Africa. So they say the monastery was built between like 550 and 565. And of course, this would have been during the Roman Empire and the Eastern Roman Empire down here. So what's glorious about this is when I wish I could kind of show two drawings at once, but for the sake of you guys. A king post truss usually looks like this. And yeah, I don't know if you want to point that. Or can I do it right here? And
yeah, sure. Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you.
You guys can still see, sorry. So a king post truss usually looks like this. And these rafters are trying to thrust out. And by doing so, what they're actually doing is kind of pinching the head of this king post. It takes a little while to kind of understand this, at least to me as a rookie timber framer. I couldn't quite see how this king post wasn't in compression, like kind of gravity pushing down on this siding. But this is a tension member. If you ask any engineer, this king post is intention, because basically the only reason it needs to tuck, these struts are cool because they come up high up the king post, 4 to 6 inches is kind of the minimum. And they're going to stiffen these rafters from bending, right? Depending on what sort of scale we have going on. So in small king post trusses, they're not even really needed, but they offer a little bit of bracing. But the main thing is often when we're doing something like this, it might be like 24 feet. And so this member is also in tension because the feet of these rafters is they're pushing down, that's pushing out on the anterior tie beam. That's why it's called a tie beam. It's tying everything together, and you snip it, and then boom, the building goes out, right? So what you have to do with the long span tie beam is keep it from sagging under its own weight. And so that's what makes the king post kind of in tension. When they're connected, this tie beam really just wants to deflect down like this. So it's going to pull on the bottom of the king post. The struts are going to stiffen up on the rafter, and then the head of that king post is being pushed on. And so this one is super cool because it's such an early example. And so this is Roman times. They do have the struts. You can see the little Roman numerals here too, the carpenter marks. We'll talk about that as far as the Notre Dame and the truss build, but that's basically because this is scribed, you know, they can't switch this rafter for that rafter. Like they each go exactly where they go because the joinery is cut in such a way to accommodate for deviations in each piece. So this is just a neat one showing that basically what it means is their tie beam is so stiff. See how deep it is? And this is, I think, only like 16 feet or it's something not very big. So it actually doesn't require support. So they clip the king post. So I'm just like, for anyone who thinks the king post is compression, like this is what shows that it's not. It's a tension member. And the struts are helping push down in this case. It'd be kind of dodgy, right? If you didn't have the struts, if you just had this, and you have this king post that could kind of get pushed in and out of plane, or you have things to worry about. But anyways, I don't want to spend too much time on it, but this is one of the oldest Western timber frame examples we have. And they of course go back 2,000-3,000 years into China and Japan. So these are some examples of that, you know, basilica here. They've added some queen struts, but all this stuff just shows what carpentry used to look like. This is an open market hall in France. So, you know, this was what your farmer's market could look like, little vendors and stalls. Here's a sweet one. Very Roman looking, right? This is an example, something that Patrick would have talked about, the guittard and the stereotomy. So I know we went over that earlier, but I mean, again, you can walk down the street and you just see this on the side of the building. We don't have that over here. These are a little favorite of mine. They're called lich gates or lick gates, but L-Y-C-H. And it was a UK Christian tradition to have a stopover, a passing place from the secular to the sacred, and in the casket procession. So during the funeral, the casket would be placed in the lich gate. There'd be a service kind of commemorating this transition from one space to another. But there's these examples all around that are just these beautiful. I mean, you can almost maybe call them follies, sadly, today. But I want to build some lich gates. And then here's a few just different typologies. You know, here's that crock blade example again. Something that's really important, I don't know if I included a good visual in this slide, but the English time joint is basically where you have a flared rafter, or sorry, a flared post, meaning that it might be 7 by 7 at the foot, and it's like 7 by 14 at the head. And so that comes from an inverted tree, an oak tree that had a lot of swell at the base. And it's a real clever system so that their top plate sits on top of the post, and there's a tenon from the post to the top plate. The tie beam sits across the jowl, as it's called. And there's a little tenon up there, they're called the teasel tenon. And then the foot of the principal rafter comes into the tie beam, and then et cetera, and you get this layered roof. I'll show you examples in some of my work. And here's again, just another kind of image. Different cool ways to, you know, tie the hands of the crux together. And then I don't have a ton in this presentation on it. I mean, but the geometry, like I mentioned, the way these people laid out their buildings, I think architectural historians have tried to describe it for years, but I think they've been so disconnected from the building process that it's kind of like drawing those triangles on paper and kind of making guesses. I mean, some of them are better than others, but there's one gentleman in particular who will come up later in the slides who's done some really interesting work on the geometrical development. And then this, of course, is the stereotomy from the French of showing the folded, exploded trigonomic projection of all these pieces. Okay, so this is a couple slides from, disregard my little logo on the bottom of it, but from Laurie Smith, and I have a book here I can show you guys at the end, that really awesome geometer in the UK. He's gone around and studied vernacular houses, big cathedrals, and he's really got a good sense on the compass geometry that was used. And again, it's a huge subject, but this is important because this is something I've tried to bring into my work too. And it's I think sometimes it gets maligned as a kind of kindergarten approach, like, oh, it's real easy, you just draw these daisy wheels and you do this thing, and like, and when you look at Lincoln Cathedral and Salisbury and Sharp and Rowan, it's almost like jazz or classical composers, where like each guy's referencing the guy who came before him and doing his own thing. Like, oh, we're going to do all this one with pentagons, and then somebody else comes along and says, oh, we're going to do this one on a whole different motif. And so that's the beauty and the variation within the Gothic as well. Why they look so different from like Milan to France to Northern Germany to the UK. Some of it's just building materials, bricks, stone, etc. But some of it's a kind of geometric. And I just think as moderns, we don't have a mind for it. We just still think in numbers too much. It's very hard. So this leads me to, I kind of went on a little tangent there talking about old timber frames, but all this was percolating. I went to Europe and I was looking for my clients. I just wanted to find the best of the best that I could on a premise store. And so after spending 4 months seeing all the Europe that I could and begging for a job at Sagrada Familia, the church of Antonio Gaudi, I came back kind of my tail between my legs, and just I come back to the States and figure out, geez, what was next. And I got lucky and I found a stone carver who worked on the National Cathedral here in DC for many years. And I worked with him, and it was amazing, but I really had a hunger for wood. And so in 2001, I went to the Smithsonian to the Renwick Gallery, and they had a huge retrospective on Sam Maloof, furniture maker. But if you don't know his work, you should check him out, MALOOF. But one of the top 3 studio furniture makers in the 21st century for sure. And it was amazing because he was there that day. I'd gone to the exhibit because it's free like several times. And it's important at this point because my wife-to-be is still in college at St. John's. I was 2 years ahead of her. And so I would go back and forth, like through DC. And so at one of these events, Sam Maloof was there, he was talking, and there were like 50,000 people there or something. It was ridiculous. There was more people than they ever had at the museum. And I'm looking at this chair and I'm kind of listening to this guy and eavesdropping on this guy's conversation. And it turns out it's this man here, Vico von Voss. I was like, I can tell this guy builds furniture. And so I begged for a job, and he said, oh, no, just kind of, here's my info, you can come visit if you want. And he's over on the Eastern Shore of Maryland. So long story short, I can't say enough good things about it. After one hard day of work, helping to move an enormous maple log that I'll show you later, I kind of talked myself into an apprenticeship. And so I spent 3 years with Vico, who was a traditional German trained through the program that Professor Lucko talked about, and so this was my attempt. It was kind of piecing it all together, like classical liberal arts education. Thought about, and I did miss one thing in here, was before graduating from St. John's, I thought about pursuing a master's in architecture. And so I did a summer program at the GSD in Harvard, and happened to be in class with Tanya. And so we made a friendship back there in 1999, I think it was. And we partied like it too. But no, and I was so happy when this all came to be, and I was brought in from one side without even knowing. Rick Brown mentions Tanya Onstad. He thought you were like off the boat from Norway, and I was like, I think I know that name. that's, and then it turned out, here she is. So, but yeah, that summer was helpful. I got an insight into what you guys do. I learned if I did get a master's, it wasn't going to be a GSD. But yeah, I just decided to go another way and to try to pursue that master builder approach. But always with great reverence and respect and interest, I would say, I guess, for the architectural profession and how it relates to what I do. So my time with Vico was immeasurable, is the most pivotal thing in my life. And one quick story is just the first day I showed up there, he said, look, I'm going to teach you everything I know, or you're going to come here. I'm going to teach you everything I know, and then you're going to leave. There's this awkward silence. And that's okay. And his point was, and what I realized through this is that in America, like a kind of apprenticeship trades education really comes down to altruism. There's no capitalistic benefit. There's really no argument, and so we walk this fine line of like anybody with a pickup truck and a circular saw can be a carpenter. So it's kind of free and liberating, and we have possibilities. But as far as young people go, if you're 17 or 18 and motivated and like want that thing, how do you get it? And so these are countries like France and Germany have been able to maintain that unbroken apprenticeship program. So that's a unfortunate challenge, but again, like I said, I kind of pieced it all together in my own American way that I could have like feel like getting a sense of history and a classical liberal arts background is very important. And I wouldn't be where I am without St. John's. And then also like the training directly from a master of trade is incredible. And so I ate it up and loved it. And then this is Vico's house. That the inside the frame is phenomenal. But so basically we built really fancy commission-based furniture that was kind of contemporary in design, but all traditionally joined, all mortise and tenon. And he was just starting to work on this. This is his workshop. That first photograph I showed of him standing in it. So that was a really fun frame where there's, I don't know, 30 different species of wood, and he likes curves. Every building on his property has a round roof. And then I was lucky because after my time with Vico, we got involved with the Timber Framers Guild, which is not a guild in the classical sense of like in Germany, or basically anybody can be a member. You pay your $100. It's a professional educational based network, but there's a culture amidst that group of people that they understand so well. And I'm sure anyone who sees this, are like, and that's what you guys are about to experience. Like the 25 people who are about to descend and be out there with axes and doing stuff. I swear they're like 25 of the coolest people you'll ever meet. And so there's a kind of soul behind it, and so the guild allowed me a kind of network to, after my apprenticeship, do a journeyman thing. I could spend 3 months in Vermont working with a crew on a timber frame. I could go down to Kentucky, restore an old mill, boom, bounce over to Oregon and do the, I mean, maybe it wasn't that far. You'd stay in, a few states in the Atlantic, but like, yeah, I got to travel a lot and work with big shops, small shops, and made some great friendships and learned a ton. Both in terms of like just production, like get it out the door, and then finer, unique work like this frame is super cool. There's an example of that English tying joint. It's this is over in West Virginia. It's for a client from England, and but this was in the early 2000s, and this was a full scribe project. This was the kind of thing I was so hungry to do. I mean, this was, in my mind, was a perfect job, and of course it wasn't. But it was close. And then this is some work from a friend of mine out in Idaho, a guy named Colin Beggs, who is one of my favorite people when I'm slow or when I can schedule it, and he's got a huge job. Like, love to work with Colin. Definitely a difference, though, you'll see in some of the stuff I'll show with all this Western softwood. So these are some of the projects that I did, running around. And so also during that time, I had, by being an itinerant, I think I was working on the Cape of Massachusetts with a company, and they said, "Oh, there's this thing going on up, this weekend at Hand's house." And I was like, "What's that?" And they're like, "Oh, it's this group of artists, and they're friends of the Timber Framers Guild, and you should go check it out." And so I went up there, and I guess that was around 2006 2006 maybe, and they were just starting to get this traction going for the synagogue project, and they had been on it for years earlier. I had heard murmurs about this project, and it took them about 10 years, and it was in 2011 that I was fortunate enough to be one of 25 timber framers to go with Hans House to Poland for 6 weeks and teach. We taught groups of college students to hew and build this, all with period tools. So again, this is Hans House kind of 1.0 for me, and part of my connection to the Browns, and seeing firsthand what they can do and how exciting it is. So the union of the guild and Hans House, I guess, is what I'm trying to say, is a very good thing, and the members of it. And so here's success. It's really fun when you're hewing a log, if you can almost just call that like a tail. If you can have one long shaving coming off. So you're busting off some chunks. Maybe this is when the log just barely is big enough to make it work. So that's a fun one. So here's some of my stuff. This is a pavilion that we did all out of cypress. Some cool details here with the hip rafters coming in to a dragon beam, and kind of knowing what's in compression, what's in tension. So obviously a big thing for me, the draw to timber framing, I guess, is the exposed structure, the joinery, and just to make it abundantly clear. So like post and beam is the large generic term, which just means verticals and horizontals and big pieces of wood, and you can connect them however you want, steel plates, whatever it is. Not if you say timber framing, in essence, you should be referring to mortise and tenon joinery with pegs. That said, like common rafters, they always get screwed down at the plate. And I mean, back in the old days, it was a big nail or whatever. And so don't let people fool you that there's this idea that timber framing came about because metal was really expensive. And I mean, it's true, it was valuable. It took a lot of work to do, but they knew that the best, this is a truss that's not a truss. It looks kind of grand, but nobody ever built that before, and there's kind of a reason. But there's some embedded steel, there's some stuff hiding in there. But this was a good job. I mean, in some sense, it takes patrons. And so we were on this job outside of Charlottesville for 2 years. This is another big horse barn, 42-foot king post truss. So this is one where I got a little clever, where you start offsetting your tie beam just to reduce the span on some things, but still kind of maintain that continuous line. So 2017, I went out to Wyoming and there's a big show out there to do. It's the Western Design Conference, a big juried arts and crafts show. And so I decided I'm going to do it. And I went back to Vico and I said, remember that maple tree we cut years ago? Like, I'm here to get some of those slabs. So this is the two of us picking up the wood. And so I did two things. I did this small little timber frame to kind of troll for bigger projects, and also see if I could sell as a small building. And then this was the table from the tree. And so this was a really cool piece for me in a way, because it was full circle. It was like, this is where it all started for me. And here it was almost 20 years later, making a beautiful piece out of it. And I mean, the figure, the curl in this wood is phenomenal. This is a hard maple, by the way. And fortunately, we did sell the table, but I didn't sell the frame. So it's 14 by 14. We'll put it in anybody's backyard who wants it, and it could be super sweet. So these are just little details. These kind of triangle facets, a way to resolve end grain. They drip water. They look cool. Shadows. And so this is a little bit of the process when we talk about like scribing. So here you can see I've got certain pieces already cut. All the pale wood is cypress, the darker wood is walnut. And so I've cut the joinery for the cypress, and then I've laid on the walnut, to do the scribing. And scribing means using, let's see here. So in this case, you're using the string as a plumb reference. And so you're looking on the top piece. What am I doing on time? Hi. You're looking at a deviation from the distance of the string in the upper piece. I mean, the simplest way to say it is, let's say this piece is the same thickness as this piece. So it's literally, what I'm imagining is that all this, I'm not imagining, this is true, that this is all level and horizontal. And so you're working on the relationship between plumb and level and square. And so this piece needs to drop an even distance kind of on each end to intersect this one. So you're looking basically how far away from the string is it up here, and you make a mark, and then you're looking how far away is it from the string up here, and you make a mark. And then you turn your head and you do it in the other direction. So you'll get to see it firsthand, but this process, it's not, as we joke about it, it's not rocket surgery, but it is complicated, and there's a kind of mystique, or like when you're a 25-year-old carpenter, you're like, wow, it just seems like magic. But once you start understanding a lot of these principles, it's really not that hard, and you're just applying kind of a given set of rules. But what it does is it allows you to make anything you want with two surfaces. So in between 2012 to 2015, so let's see, I did my journey worker period, started my own company, I think took on my first big private project in 2004, and was running Finch Woodworks, got married, started a young family, have 4 children like Tanya. And so life was great, but busy and hard, and all the ups and downs of self-employment and trying to keep a shop going. And so then in 2012, I got a phone call from the American College of Building Arts, which is a school in Charleston, South Carolina, with an interest after Hurricane Hugo and the destruction of all the historic properties. There was a lament, and I don't think this is always true, but there was an attitude that, oh, we have to go to Europe to find the people who know how to do this. We just don't have the people here who know this kind of stuff. We should start a school to train them. So great idea. I mean, good concept. But I do always try to remind people there's more people here who know more in this country than you think they do. It's kind of a shame when they have to like import some Italian carving for a church when there's a guy in Indiana who can do it in limestone or something. But it's almost like the prestige of the distance. So I, 2012, went to teach timber framing as a professor at ACBA, and really loved it. And it was kind of, again, that next step in my career of my college background, my training with Vico, my working in the field, and now coming back to kind of synthesize some of that into a teaching perspective. And so I should also say, along the Timber Framers Guild, what it really does most is hosts workshops and events where 30 people come together for 10 days, and at the end there's a big 40 by 60 building. I mean, like, a lot happens really quickly, and so it's a great way to learn. Hopefully we'll be doing more of them. In the early 2000s, it seems like there was a lot more than after kind of 2012-ish. But yeah, so you go from attending to teaching those, is what I'm saying. And it's just kind of the process, the ladder. So this is a little frame that's really fun. This is part of the challenge with ACBA is, young school and underfunded. And so I had a junior class that I was supposed to be teaching scribe rule timber framing to, that whole layout method. And so I found somebody who wanted a little building, and, it's kind of like going to the beauty college to get a haircut. He gave us $5,000 for the wood, and, then boom, he gets this $30,000 building or something. It was like a steal, but it gave us, a whole semester of something to do and to teach. So that's often how it has to work, because teaching timber framing, as you can imagine, is a little bit difficult. Like, it involves big things and like kind of a front end purchase, and it takes several weeks. It's not like let's snap our fingers and do this in a weekend, or show you on little 4x4s. It's like, that's not really how you do it. So anyways, it's a challenge just to teach it, to host these projects. But this was a fun one where we just incorporated a lot of, I had an arborist in Charleston who had a Jordan pile. He knew what I was after, all the curvy stuff. And so a lot of that's live oak. The main frame is southern yellow pine. But these would all be considered, firewood. And some of them are close. But it was a fun frame, and allowed us to, so here we are scribing in the braces with the students. And a lot like what Gunnar mentioned and others, so much of this scribe rule stuff starts, if you have several layups, like sections of a frame to do, it's typically done by snapping lines out on the floor, and then positioning the timbers above them repeatedly, so you know you're getting the same thing every time. But it's pretty cool to make like full-scale drawings, and that's what I mean when you get into that concept of the master builders. Is where it dawned on me, this whole like proportionate, and you can do something with a compass on a 24 by 36 kind of board or piece of paper, and then you can inflate the compass, and step that off and walk it out and get it on a much grander scale. And so I believe that's how, and the most accurate way to draw a square is actually to use a circle. And so, I mean, as a guy who goes to site and thinks about, did the concrete guys get the foundation in the right spot, and our timber frame has to fit other stuff. And I mean, we play this game of trying to make things in the natural world line up with some kind of geometry. And we got lasers and batter boards and all kinds of techniques. But it's pretty cool to me to think of these guys like with kind of a peg and a long rope, and like swinging out the corners and like drawing almost that big daisy wheel out there in the field, and like picking these points of intersection, and then bam, Notre Dame looks pretty good on the foundation plan, 800 years later. It's like, it's all within a margin, but it's pretty awesome. So I guess what I even mean is it's logical in the sense that you would build that way, because it's just your toolkit blown up from a small little compass to a big set of dividers or even a rod. And so that segues into, this is another workshop, different building, but you can see maybe the dark lines are just sort of clear spray paint. Like you snap all these out in chalk lines and then put some clear spray paint over top of it so they don't get worn away so quickly in the process. But that's how we basically built this building with no tape measures. And that's the gentleman I was referring to, Laurie Smith, and myself and my son Asher up there in the basket putting on the wedding bush. But that was a workshop that Laurie led and shared his geometrical knowledge. So this is an example of some of the stuff that we design. So for me, with the timber frames I wanted to make, based off of what I was seeing historically, this is an example of one of my favorite little frames. This was 2009. So you've got cherry and cypress, and it's called a sling brace. It's similar to a crook, but it's slightly different. The crook, usually these blades would touch all the way to the floor and rise a little further. But I love everybody likes open spaces, everybody likes hammer beams, but hammer beams rely on flying buttresses. We won't go into that whole like history lesson, but it's become a very, like, if you go to Barnes and Noble and you get the Classic Timber Frame magazine, it's going to be like big Doug fir and kind of Western chalets. And I mean, there's some nice work. They look grand. There's nice things, but it's kind of clunking us down, and everybody loves the hammer beam. Like, how do we get rid of that tie beam? It's the first thing people want to do, right? That thing's in the way, even though it's 24 feet in the air or something, but they feel it's obtrusive. But I like this little building will roll through, so this is my kind of modern, it's cleaner because everything is hand planed and smoother. And that's what I meant. What's funny is all those examples, like, I really do love the crusty stuff, like straight off the axe. It doesn't mean it's sloppy. It doesn't mean it's any less precise. It's just different. And those little 16th, 8th inch gaps, like, they do start to fade out. You don't really notice them as much because there's an irregularity in the surface. Some people have said that this is the challenge, is once you make something look so good. Think about modern materials, right? Like, as soon as that acoustic panel, somebody throws a hockey puck at it or something, like, you can't make it look good. It's non-renewable, maintenance free means maintenance impossible. You write that one down. And that, like vinyl siding, all this stuff, right? That's what I'm not saying, but also wood is not just this process of entropy. It's not like you cut a tree down and put it outside. It's just always working towards rot or decay. Kept high and dry and protected, it'll last a long time. Left outside or unprotected, I mean, decks like are kind of American thing that everybody likes a nice flat open space, but it's kind of an act of hubris. It's pretty ridiculous to just make a big wooden floor and let it get rained down and kind of wonder why it's not going so well. But then the alternative, like Trex and those other things, is not much better. But anyways, the point of all that is to say that the texture and the wood and the processing, all of this creates a composite sort of whole. And we get a little carried away in all the furniture as well. So I really like, and I love bringing out the beauty and the grain, in these pieces. It probably doesn't show as good in these slides, but I mean, there's all kinds of pearl and crotchwood and just beaver. And so yeah, this remains one of my favorite little homes. It was, if there's a good. It was all built at one time, but obviously kind of log portion, timber frame portion, and then there was a stick framed kitchen. So this is kind of like little dining, eating area, and then main hangout living area. They've got a screen porch here now. It's a beautiful little modest house that they just did an awesome job with. And but again, like they came to me saying, hey, we'd like to do a timber frame bigger. And their first drawing looked a lot like that, because that's what everybody's drawing of a timber frame looks like. And so I said, what about this? Oh, wow. And so this was 2009. This is when I was first kind of I was trying, and this is the first one where somebody was like, go for it. And I got lucky, and I went to this sawmill, and they had 20-foot long curvy cherries that they were probably going to buck up into 2 or 3 different individual logs. And I said, no, I want to buy them as is, and they thought I was crazy. What are you going to do with that? And so anyways, sometimes it's a process of you draw it and then you have to go find the wood. But so 2012 to 15 teaching was great, but there was this too much going on. Here's another shot of college between my family and my teaching and my business, because I was still working privately in too, that we decided to come back to Virginia. And this is a great shot. This is my beautiful wife, Quindy, with our 4th. And I just always love it. It kind of reminds me of that. Is it Donatello or the rotund? There's a pregnant Mary, and the whole image is round. This is roundness goes with fertility. And so here she is in that medieval tide barn, Bradford on Avon. And yeah, so we came back to Virginia, and there's the little guy, Gus. And these are all so long ago. This is my son. This guy, Asher, is now 14. He's like 11. And it comes back to sort of one of my mantras, which is, put tools in the hands of children. We wonder a lot about where do we learn these things? How do we pass it on? How do we teach it? And I was struck because at a lot of these field conferences I would go to, I get involved with a children's workshop. In the early years, honestly, it just helped because I take $200 out of my $1,000 conference fee or something, and I was a Ford timber frame. But obviously I really enjoyed it and I liked it. And a lot of conversations around this subject are always coming up in the trades. How do we pass this on? And somebody told a story about these, I think they were South Korean again, these carpenters working on a building, and film crew comes up, and they ask them, like, who taught you how to do this stuff? And they look at him with this blank stare, kind of like they don't understand the question. And they're like, well, how'd you learn? Like, they just gave us these tools. We've always had them. And I think there's a big part of that. It's hard in our culture. We wait so long and we think we're being protective. But I found really good results giving my kids axes instead of video games. And so it's everything from Montessori based, just a little version of a real thing. That's what people want. People want real things. And I've noticed too amongst a lot of young Catholics in either the homeschooling world or the private schools and the universities, they're the ones who are drawn to traditional architecture. They're the ones who are drawn to guys like Clay Chapman or 1,000-Year House, masonry building, who's a good friend of mine. And because they're the ones drawn to organic farming, traditional liturgies, wherever you want to take it, right? Because they want real things. And so to me, that's the blessing kind of this environment of the church, of what it has to teach us, is this if we're working on something real, that nourishes our soul and is the right thing. So I'm big fan, of having kids do the work. I think I'll just fade the black on that. Let's see if I have some closing punchline, but
Microphone is. Yeah, there we go. The audience is missing out.
well, I think that's the biggest thing is thinking about who I'm talking to or you guys is both in your careers, pursue the things that you are fascinated by, that you find value in, that you think are real. Don't get caught up in the greenwashing. Ripping out your historic wooden windows to put in vinyl storm windows is not efficient. There's so many things, and everybody now is all excited about 3D printing. Get an axe. Dude, just draw by hand. I'm a slave to this computer. We use power tools, we use hand tools, all this stuff. But every time, I can not listen to these machines. Okay, here's the punchline. Here's the irony. We just looked at some of the most beautiful architecture and buildings in Western history, and there's two things. All the great architecture of the world was built with child labor, and then that now we live in an age of manufacture and modernity and kind of a promise of labor-saving devices. That's the whole goal of post-industrialism, right? Is that we were going to put more chickens in pots and more cars in garages, and everybody was going to get a little bit more stuff. And these machines were going to do all the work, and we were going to have more leisure time. We all know that's not true. And meanwhile, we're sucking the planet drive resources to do it. And then to try to create a wind turbine or something. So be careful. Just watch out for who's feeding you a line. And that's it. Thank you so much.
There's going to be some questions.
Uh-oh.
I'm going to take the mic and pass it. Okay, so I'm trying to have some questions. You can imagine Jordan and I spent a lot of time talking. Questions, when it passes around.
I have a question, kind of a comment for the class too. Maybe they'll set something up for their questions. Because one of the things that we first talked about, Kana and I were discussing before the class started, was the thinking about timber framing, thinking about Notre Dame's history and woodworking, but also thinking about the tools, modern tools we have today to teach the class.
Right.
First printing paper to scribe. Using the tools that we have in the wood shop, so we wouldn't buy traditional tools, combining whatever saws we have, and not forgetting, that we can combine modern and traditional methods to make, not use it as a crutch, but to help.
Absolutely.
So not to forget, that we are living in a contemporary time, but not use it as a crutch. So
sure. Yeah, I would say it's just a chat. At the risk of going to one end of the spectrum and being a Luddite, we'll say, somebody who's just all about, I'm going to do it because, I think all technology is bad. There's definitely a risk in that. And at the end of the day, I have to make a living doing this. But you got to be careful. And that's what I mean, too, is that self-honesty to kind of ask yourself what you're participating in. What am I creating? What am I sustaining? And so I have a twinge every time that I get involved in that game, but I certainly am guilty of spending tens of thousands of dollars, hundreds, on power equipment. And then you look at that $500 hand plane and you're like, gosh, I don't know. And so now the last 5 years I've been like, you already bought all the machines. Now buy that hand plane. And you'll get a whole lifetime of use out of it, your son will get it. So there's different values in these tools and different things they can do. And that's what I'm saying too, is just avoid everything is going to tell you. All the YouTube videos, all the ads, all the stuff. It's all going to be about a new router review. the new jig that makes everything easier. Like I've been there. I mean, I've eaten all that up, and you just have to watch out that is it faster? Are you interested in production? Are you into all these tools only are surface referencing? So when you live in a SketchUp world and everything is S4S and perfect, now you really care about your joiner and your cleaner. Because if your material is not square, you don't have anything. That's what surface referencing woodworking relies on. On the other side of the spectrum, the hewing, the scribing is so cool that router is not going to help you out. You'll see, like the fastest way to cut that joint in that material is with an axe, because you're the one who controls it. It's like floating. You're creating a plane. It's all these Cartesian planes. That's what's so much fun too about, we'll snap chalk lines and those truss, and like we talk about the drawings, is constantly not even really thinking about the wood itself. It's like the planes that are in it. And if I respect those, then I know I'm doing things in a proper fashion. I don't know if I said that terribly clearly, but anyways, that's the risk. Yes, and there is a balance. I've just seen people go the other way where most timber framing, it's been on the rise, since the early 2000s, since I got started. There's a machine called a Hundiger. It's a CNC controlled massive machine that you stick an 8x12 in one end, and out comes a timber with a tenon and mortise, and they're all pill shaped because they're all cut with these like router kind of things. So that's how you can know if you come on a job site and you see a timber frame laying there and it's got all these pill shaped mortises and pill shaped tenons. Well, that's a CNC cut frame. At least if they're, and I hate to say that there's some really good ones. A lot of people say it depends on the operators, it depends on these different things, but what ends up happening is you dumb yourself down, you design your joinery to what the machine can cut. They're constantly getting more advanced. I don't know. That's when people get excited. They're like, we got this 3D robotic arm, that can create this sculptural log thing and and it's sort of like, you just took my job. Like I can do that. Computers used to not be able to do it. So it's always a foot race. And so I'm just saying, just watch out who's your friend and who's your foe. But yes, I grab that router, I grab that chainsaw, I grab all those things. I couldn't say I don't.
I don't know the question, but so what is the most exciting thing about the full-scale truss next week?
Most exciting thing. I mean, like, I don't know, it'll sound cheesy, but I mean, it's the people. It's the trust is the excuse, and as one of the kind of 4 team leaders, like we have a weekly call, and I think we were kind of reminding ourselves, where it came up in the call, that just like we're not really building a trust, or this is that it's our focus and it's not our focus. If at the end of the day we only have 8 pieces of wood hewn and we don't have a trust, then we have a problem, right? Like we're thinking like project managers, like carpenters, like this is a job and a client, but obviously it's a very different world too. So I'll put it this, it's a luxury. Timber framers timber frame on vacation because it feels better than when you're timber framing on work. And hopefully you guys will too. And so, yeah, I think that's the excitement is all the months, everything that's been leading up to this. I mean, Rick first called me in November last year, I guess 2020, and said, we want to build a full-scale truss. What do you think? And I was like, that sounds awesome. And then it became a reality in March and April, and now we've been plugging along, finding trees, getting the drawings sorted out, and working with CUA and permits on the mall. So I mean, it's amazing. Like I said, when I got to be involved in the Poland project, I knew it was something very, very special. And you guys should watch that documentary. And Rick Brown has a really good TED talk too that's worth looking at to get an insight into him. But everybody talked about it like it was a once in a lifetime opportunity. And I guess that's the hard part, is you hope it's not true. I mean, it might be able to happen more than once. And so, like I said, that's my kind of should have been my closing thing, was as a 20-year-old kid, I wanted to build cathedrals. First, I got to build a synagogue, and then now we're working on Notre Dame. Again, one step closer, and it's who knows. So that to me, I mean, would be incredible. But yeah, so this is just getting to share what we love with a lot of other people and learn from them too. I'm just excited to get to know all you guys and what's going to come out of this process, see the model, have the dialogues, the conversations. Yeah, like I said, the trust is the excuse. It's the feeder for all the good human content. Yeah.
Well, thank you for your lecture. The question is, I know you've been working and very experienced in the field of woodworking.
Mhm.
I wanted to know if you yourself have experienced or discovered any new methods of like joinery or woodworking techniques that you've done yourself that others, because I know mortise and tenons have been, years and everything. Like, have you, or do you want to try like coming up with new ways of them?
Well, no, that's a really great question, and I try. There's nothing new under the sun, and I think that's the best part about a craft tradition, is that, and you guys have faced a similar challenge, and we'll talk about that in a sec. But like in the craft world, it's like, it's not about you, it's about you learning what someone else has already said, right? And then you can maybe try to get creative or supersede it or, advance it. So sure, there's always a development. We know timber frames. Like, I like to tell people that my favorite timber framing vernacular style is, I really like the UK stuff. And I'll tell people the heyday of timber framing was really like 1500. After that, it just all goes downhill. I know people in Norway who, like, if it was built after the Black Death, they're not really interested. And so, I mean, there's just like, there's a tendency to look for a golden age or to look for these things, but also to see snapshots in time. You guys do this all the time, right? With your architectural studies, like those late 1800 buildings, as nice as they are, they might not be quite the same thing as that Renaissance or, 1600s, or like, there's just, you see what's changing. And so that's how I read timber framing, why it's my passion and why I study it. And I don't just get it. A long time ago, it was just, I was excited about a mortise and tenon. Now I realize there's a lot of ugly timber frames, right? So the idea is to make good architecture and good timber frames, work together. And so to say, yeah, I want to get creative, but I learned, like, people don't, it would have been done by now if it was a good idea when it comes to wood building. And so what I can do is, that's where I get excited about it, is instead of just building with a lot of rectangles, my tagline is, we buy the straight wood and we hunt for the crooked stuff. And so I custom saw all that walnut, all that cherry, all that ash, all that fun stuff. And then I buy the 8x12 by 24 footers. And that's how I've been able to make it cost effective, in a sense, for a client. Yeah, my work's probably higher than average, but it's like, it allows me to do the kind of work I'm excited about, and still make something reasonable for the client at the end of the day. And then I'm in the service industry. Ultimately, if they don't want it, like this, that big truss with all the stuff in it, like, sometimes you just gotta make it, because that's the job and you need to eat. And so you check some of that, but I'm not really interested in inventing a new kind of joint or a new kind of approach to timber framing. What I'm interested in is utilizing all that fun stuff and quote, thinking outside the box. The beauty of it is, though, is if you look at the frames, they're really just almost reproductions from the Middle Ages. And that's what I love, though, is because you can fool people and it can kind of look contemporary, especially if it's more cleaned and planed and polished. But I mean, you can imagine all that stuff goes with like steel and glass in that kind of way too. I mean, that's the timber framer's lament, is like, we see these beautiful naked frames under a blue sky, and they look great. And eventually you got to close them in. And nobody lives in a pavilion, we say. So it's like, there's always that aspect. But I don't know, did that help? It's like, there's a great video offline I'll tell you guys about, and it's this guy's 10 bullets, guy named Tom Sachs. And one of the bullets is, creativity is the enemy. And yeah, so don't be original. Whatever you do, don't be original.
First, thank you for the presentation. So studying, I guess my question is, from a broader standpoint, studying kind of traditional classical architecture, the reality of working at the firms, and the reality of kind of the people who are currently able to, like, the standards very high and the price is very high.
Right.
You mentioned Craig Chapman. I know his stuff is very interesting to me, because he's making this brick mass wall and comparing it to stick framing and cost and stuff. I was just wondering if you have a general optimism that the standard, I guess, is recovering. And that gap is kind of closing between traditional crafts and kind of regaining the vernacular as a standard for housing, or moving towards at least a better kind of standard.
Very good question. This is something I've spoken about with different academics and faculties and professional architects, and sometimes they're both. What I tell, and even what I tell clients when they call, is that these days we don't build our houses a whole lot different than we build our cars. Masonry foundation, stick frame, walls, and then you choose your veneers. And so if you put a classical pastiche, to use a word that bothers architects, right? I'm not so thrilled. Or you do it in AZEC, or in one of these synthetic trims. Like, I don't know if you got your Greek cornice and you're raking this and that, but it's all done with like styrofoam. Not really sure. A lot of guys like Clay Chapman and some of the people who inspired me as a younger person reminded me that with historic buildings, it's like the way you make sure a building's going to last is that you make it lovable. And that's, I think, one of the problems with a lot of our modern buildings. And we all know we're up against challenges. People have budgets. People live in a house for 7 years. They move. I mean, there's so many different dynamics. Maybe they don't think about building a legacy for 500 years. But so I get that architects have their hands tied in a sense too, and that they want to, don't take this the wrong way, like they want to draw pretty pictures. They want to have nice buildings. It should look like this. It should have these details. But then if there's like, oftentimes I'm sad to say, a lot of your drawings look better than the finished building, right? Because of execution. And I don't know, and that often gets somehow distilled into, oh, well, real good stone and real good craft work is really expensive. And it is, but so is like all this other crap we put in our buildings that you might argue, like that's the problem. The houses are like the cars, right? They're not just like tech. I mean, Corbusier was right in a sense that a house is a machine for living in. I heard that in '99 and wanted to throw up. Like Corb and me, have differences on things. But so yeah, that's a real trick. Where do we go with this? And I always tell people I can even sell myself out of a job. Nobody needs a timber frame. Nobody needs what I do. And some people say, oh no, Jordan, that's not true. They but I think that they don't really, they have to want it. And often timber frames are part of a hybrid structure where there's, stick framing and other things going on. So like, I still like to think at the end of the day, the finished product is better than those houses I described earlier, or like what's going to happen in 70 years when it needs a major gut and a renovation. Like, I think we know that a lot of them are just going to knock over. And we see our building components as just kind of like, do it again. It's more efficient, it's cheaper. We can, all these kind of things. It's just so hard. So if you're a maker who cares about what you make and trying to do something, that's all. It's like, I don't want to change the world or like the whole nature of capitalism. I don't know. I don't think I can. But like, I do feel these pressures and these tensions that how do I create the best work I think I can, participate in the craft tradition. That's where, much like you guys too. I mean, that's what's fun. Is like you feel like you're putting on the jet, like you're part of the club or the team. Like you, not in a separatist or an elitist way, but just that, you made an investment. You did something. So I think there's one thing too about, I just want that architects give a lot of lip service to including these traditional tradespeople, but I've had a lot of hard time getting that to happen. I've been pulling on the coat strings of high-end architects for a long time, sending cold calls, emails, this and that, trying to, oh yeah, we can help you out, we'd love, and everything I do is design-based. Like we start with that, we draw, and I don't want to steal the thunder. They come to me and they say, we got this, what we're kind of thinking, and I'll show them how to fit a timber frame inside of it. That is well constructed, that is well thought out, that it has a knowledge of joinery over 800 years, not just like since 1982. So that's where you don't get ahead by being 8 feet. And I realized when I said the thing about timber framing, it came about not because the error in thinking that it was because metal was expensive. It's because wood to wood joinery, when you do like with like and building materials, there's no moisture coefficient. There's no dew point. So anytime you have dissimilar materials, one's gonna react differently than the other. Stone against metal, wooden window jamb against glass pane, sweats. So that it's not like a deal breaker, it's just something to pay attention to. So wood to wood joinery, they realized that's why they last so darn long. And these post-industrial kind of trusses with a lot of iron hardware, you've seen them, you go up in the end, they're all sweating, corroded, and they're not gonna fail instantly. I mean, they'll last a really long time, but there's a degrade. And so this thing that we think is invincible, like steel and concrete, is actually hurting the wooden truss. So there you have it.
Okay, we're all past time.
Sure.